Another journey. Today's journey is with Thomas R. Wilson. Thomas is a business owner, writer, advocate, community leader, and sensory event specialist who believes strongly that stories are integral to the human experience. His work strives to carry that mindset into helping those around him to heal the world through sharing their voice. And that is a good subject because that is what the journey is about. But we welcome Thomas to the journey.
Thank you for having me on. I'm glad to be here.
You're welcome. Now, many journeys have a beginning, and many people will always say there's a defining moment in your early days, when you're a youth or a teenager. But what was the defining moment that started your pathway to where you are now?
So I definitely say there are several, but the one I'm going to focus on, I've talked about this before on other podcasts, but I'll try to give a few more details. I have loved stories ever since I was a kid. And for me, I would say a pivotal point is I remember I was really young, probably 3 years old, for maybe a little older based on I don't know if I have memories that far away, but I remember listening to my dad and my mom read stories to me. As a kid, I've ever since I was real little, I've loved writing. I've loved the idea of how words can transform things. So I'd say those nights when it was, dark out, I was sitting in a space with people I loved and just heard stories ranging from Dr. Seuss to other storybooks, those moments of just feeling joy and calm, being cuddled up in a blanket, I really do believe set me on a path to loving stories and pursuing the career that I am in now, especially because of that human connection that is such a part of them.
Yeah, I really believe that because it's the imagination that is often in my thoughts when you think of stories. It's like you got stories that are classic, you got stories that are modernized, but in the same sense, it's the belief that if you, it's not a picture book, you picture your own pictures to that story.
Definitely.
So, was there any books that you remember that struck you and said, wow?
Yes, so there's a few. So I remember when I was a kid, I had a huge passion for reading and reviewing Dr. Seuss's work.
Hmm.
And other than Edgar Allan Poe's work, I would say Dr. Seuss's work had a real impact on me. And one story that's been really prevalent throughout my life in my journey has been the book All the Places You'll Go. That book has shown up in various points in my life where it's almost been a symbol of motivation to do something more in my life. I remember when I was a kid in young elementary school days, it was common in the classroom. As I became a teenager, it became a symbol of the promise that I have in my life to do great things. But the thing I love about this book is that it is such a beautiful explanation of what we can do as human beings as we explore, as we understand our own passions to pursue what we want in life. And because of that, this book has been it's shown up seemingly random several points in my life, but it's always been a motivator and it's always seemingly popped up in my mind or in my life when I really needed something to motivate me.
Mm, I really get that. So, and I like talking about books as a well, but The Never-Ending Story by Michael End, that's my go-to book when I was growing up, and then obviously the movie made it more popularized. But do you believe stories like that give the hope that it relates to people saying there is hope out there for?
Absolutely. I truly believe that one of the great strengths of the written word is to inspire, to uplift, to encourage. I think we need to be in this right mindset, in the right emotional status to be able to truly see that. But I mean, as someone who has loved Edgar Allan Poe, Robert Frost, many other poets throughout his life, as well as many books, I would say that the written word and books in general and stories are meant to inspire and meant to be interpreted in ways that allow us to have that passion to pursue or to move forward or to try to heal. I think many writers have tried to achieve that, but I do think the core aspect is how books and stories connect to us as human beings. And I think for many people I know, and I know for myself, that whatever story it may be for each person, I think there is almost something spiritual about the written word and stories that connects and inspires the human self.
Yeah, and do you feel when you was in school, do you feel like you had people who felt that way, or do you feel like you was isolated as a consequence because you chose to read books?
So I would say yes and no. When I was in school, the majority of my school years I really struggled to connect. I had my own mental health needs, and I had a lot of negative experiences. I will say that did ostracize me a bit, having a strong connection to the written word. But I would say for the few friends I had, I found a common agreement between us was that stories were important and stories did matter. That wasn't always the case with every friend I had, but I found the people who, throughout my life in school and college, I found that the people I often connected to most had a strong love of stories and books as well.
So going into the teenage, into the young adult life, did this carry on from being a youth? Did the passion grow stronger?
Yes, I remember in my teenage years, my love for stories only increased, especially as I got older. In the work that I do, that I actually focus on stories being a big part of helping people build self-advocacy and real life skills. And the foundations of the ideas for that kind of work really formulated when I was a teenager into early adulthood. I've also worked as a reading tutor for the Littleton school system briefly. And I think some of the things that really helped that ability to grow was the reception to my own writing, my own stories, but also in the idea that I really started to discover that stories were more than just a great unifier. They were a way of people to survive. They were a way for me to pursue the passions in life, but they were also this really special connection to who and what I wanted to be in life. And when I started my work as a young teenager, um, doing volunteering story events, what I discovered was they were something that gave me a great deal of joy and serenity. So discovering that as a teenager into early adulthood really was a great joy and a passion that ignited with stories at that age.
And obviously, your book knowledge became more extensive as you got older as well. You didn't limit,
Absolutely.
and you didn't limit yourself to just saying, "Oh, I like this." You got stronger and stronger.
Absolutely. Yes.
Now, I know from when I was growing up in England, when I was in England, school books were set for, set ages. So they would always give you like two book boxes dedicated to that age group. So, for example, if you were six, there was two boxes for six, two boxes for seven. And if they felt like you was able to, and this is how I was, they gave you the free choice of the actual library. So you wasn't just conformed to reading the set books that were, as per se, manufactured for the younger set age. You was able to read books like Roald Dahl, Dickens Smith, I'm trying to think of some American authors, but I can't think of them offhand. But you was open to reading any kind of book you wanted, and I just found that amazing because from an early age, and I was literally 6 stroke 7, when I had that access to the old library, and it felt like a whole world was open to me.
I did have something similar. A lot of my passion to read more complicated books really came from my defiance of a lot of things. I learned that at a young age, a lot of people had some predisposed thoughts of who I was and who I was going to be. And even after I started struggling in school, and I say struggling because I was capable of doing things, I was capable of excelling, but I wasn't really supported in school. So I read a lot of books that were more advanced. I started reading college level books when I was in high school. And I'd like to say that that was always a consistent thing, but I found when a lot of people were pushing what they expected of me on me, I didn't want to meet that, so I didn't meet their standards. So a lot of the reading, a lot of the books that I did were actually outside of school. And I will actually say that like comic books and graphic novels and even manga from Japan became a really important part of my life, partly because I could read things that were above my age range, but they were always these stories of people exceeding expectations and people fighting against systems that were holding people back. And so a lot of my reading was also comic books at that age. Luckily, I had access to resources that allowed me to explore a wide variety. And so that was a good chunk of my reading. I hope that kind of helps to explain how things were for me.
Yeah, it does. And obviously, now we're going into for now an adulthood for you. How has it been as an adult to be able to push what you learnt as a child, stroke young, youth, teenager? How did you think it progressed from the early ages to the where you are now and grown older?
So I'd definitely say I've had a lot of rough years in my adulthood, but especially within the last few years as I've been really entering into my 30s, and I've been exploring things further. Um, Carrying everything that I've learned as younger ages, I feel like I'm able to truly craft the stories, the life that I want to, and the life that I know that other people want life. I've done a lot of advocacy and a lot of work around stories, arguing that they are something that can really heal the community and sharing my own experiences. And I found within the last few years, for myself and for the community, I feel like I'm finally living a life that I was meant to live through stories, through so many things. And it's this beautiful kind of contrast to feeling like I don't always deserve it, but I'm putting in the work and I know that I can appreciate it and I can value it. And in these last few years, especially in my adulthood, I've learned a lot of things about happiness, about perseverance, all about life in general. And I really do believe if I didn't have stories, if I didn't have the experiences I had, I wouldn't be myself. But I'm also learning to define better boundaries with things, define what I really want in life and pursue it, and really explore who I feel like I was always meant to be. And I've run across a lot of adults where like your 30s are really when you start living life, when you start exploring things. And it could be different for other people. But I would say through everything I've been through everything I've explored, I think I've really cultivated my best self. And so much of that is stories and all the negativity. But I think it's also about embracing the mentalities of like what happiness is, what it can be, what joy can be, and living life not always for other people, but for myself. And so in that, I feel like I'm, constantly able to be better, but constantly appreciating my life in a different capacity.
Yeah, and obviously books as a whole can be good, and many people are now jumping on and starting writing their own books about their life, and I like it because it gives the perspective of, even if it's not indirectly saying names, when you're talking about life, it helps them cope, I think.
I definitely agree. I think one of my favorite things about this modern era of stories is that there's so many more opportunities for people to write, to tell their story in their unique way, and keep their story the way that they want it to be by not having to work with bigger industries, not having to work with bigger publishers, because we're in this really amazing place where there's so many different avenues to write and create and do so many different things and stories in life and keep your rights, keep your protection over your work. And I think that's only going to grow as society continues. And I think it's going to give people the power and the privilege to write their stories in the way that they want and tell their stories in a way that'll really help the community.
Yeah, and I really believe that too because I've been reading the series of books recently, and the passion of the author is just immense, and you can feel, yeah, they write in poetry form, but the power of how they write it, it just makes me part of being there, understanding. I know I wasn't there, but it's the power of how they wrote the words, and that's what I like in a book, whether it's poetry books, if it's normal fiction books, non-fiction, whatever, it's just the empathy of how it's written on page.
I've had a few of those experiences too, and I can definitely appreciate where you're coming from.
So going into the future, do you see books still going to be the main thing, or is it just going to be going away from physical books where it is the digital age? Like we do have apps out there now which do give you the digital book, or do you prefer reading physically a paperback, hardback?
So I think as we go into the future as human beings, I think stories are going to be, first of all, I know stories are going to continue to exist. I've seen a lot of really awesome things happen in the last few years where there's been more storytelling channels. There's on YouTube, there's the population of D&D that's increasing. There's so many different mediums that are encapsulated into storytelling that have evolved just within a very short time. So I think there's going to be more and more digital options, but I think there's something truly special about books, like a hardcover book that is so different than the pride of reading or listening to something digitally. I think for a long time, and this may change, we may go through a large upsell of digital books and hardcover may disappear more. But I think for so many people, there's a tactile, mental, physical, and spiritual experience of owning and reading through a physical book. And I think as we grow in society, even if we stop printing for a while, we will go back to physical books because as much as I love digital stuff and multiple media, there is something so powerful about holding a book in your hands and then like reading through it and finishing it. And I think as human beings, we crave that. So I think no matter what happens, in some way, physical books will still exist or
Hmm,
come back or thrive.
totally understand that, and I really believe that too. So, to conclude this interview, obviously people might want to get in contact with you, and can they do that? Can they contact you and ask for advice?
Absolutely. If you have any questions or or you want to chat or you want an interview, whatever it may be, you're welcome to email me at ndttrpg@gmail.com. I'll also give my link tree to David for the interview. So everyone can have all the resources on my work. And if there's anything you want to chat about, I'm a huge believer in the power of questions, and I'm never upset if someone asks one. So please feel free to reach out. And as we begin to wrap up, I do want to say thank you for listening to my, somewhat rambly conversation, but and thank you as well for having me on.
You're welcome. It's been a pleasure. Now, the last question I always like asking, and yes, we said about reaching out to you, but what would you say to potential up and coming authors, people who are writing books, people who like books, people who read books? What would you say to them now?
I would say, um, I know there's going to be hard days. I know there's going to be days where it doesn't feel worth it. But there is so much power in people who want to write. There's so much power in you writing your story. So even on the hard days, even on the difficult days, even on the complicated days, please don't give up because, well, there's a mentality that not, the mentality of if everyone's special, no one's special. I heartily disagree with that. I think we all have our own radiant story to tell. We all have our special story to tell. And even if you don't become rich and famous, there could be one person who needs your story to get through the next day or next month or next year. And that is so much more valuable than becoming a famous author, in my opinion.
Thomas, thank you for sharing your journey with us today.
Thank you for having me on and thank you for letting me share it.
Thank you.